Cool. Well, thanks everyone for coming. This is a long-term lunch and learn with Eric Ries. I'll give a very very brief introduction on Eric, and then if I'm pretty sure he's in here, feel free to.
I'm here.
Actually, I need to highlight him. Yeah, there he is. Cool. So this is Eric Ries. As you all probably know, he wrote the Lean Startup, which is like the startup Bible that was written, 15 years ago. All things how to build and iterate and learn and build great companies. Since then, he started at the Long-Term Stock Exchange, which is the most recent stock exchange founded in the world, to my knowledge. And he's all about thinking about long-term thinking, how he can help founders think longer term, but actually align with that direction, not just in having the intention, but actually position the company to go long. And a lot of the content that we're going to be talking about today is going to be very focused on that exactly. So the format of this Lunch and Learn is going to be pretty interactive. So I have some questions prepared for Eric. But if any of you have questions, I encourage you to put them in the chat as we're talking. And then as we go along, I'll if it's a relevant question to the conversation, I'll call on you and you can ask your question, and we can just learn about all things long-term thinking in business. So first off, let me actually feature you, Eric. Let's see, spotlight for everyone. There we go. How's it going, Eric? Welcome to
I'm doing well.
Lunch and Learn.
How's everybody doing? Hello. You hear me okay?
We can hear you loud and clear. We got a thumbs up from
Yes.
Carla. Cool. Perfect. Cool. Scott, LTSE for the win. Let's go. Yeah, feel free to keep the chat lively. If you don't have a question but you have a comment, or you kind of are liking things that Eric is saying, feel free to cheer on in the comments. That kind of what keeps us fun and lively and all that fun stuff. So yes, Eric is a legend. I completely agree. So to start this off, and we also just got a few people to join, so I'll just reiterate, if you have questions for Eric, feel free to put them in the chat, and then to keep this kind of organized, I will pick people individually to ask their questions, and you can come on camera and ask your question. But I encourage you to refrain from just like asking whenever you want, because it might be disorganized and people might talk over themselves, etc. So just feel free to put the question in the chat, then I can call on you to ask your question. So let's kind of just start at the very, I guess, beginning, not of the birth, but essentially I think a lot of people, Eric, they know you as the author of the Lean Startup, but you wrote that book a long time ago. So just to start this whole thing off, can you kind of give us an idea of what have you been doing since the Lean Startup? What have you been up to, which will be a nice segue into the content of today's Lunch and Learn?
Sure. So Lean Startup came out in 2011, so it's been a little while. And before that, I had been a tech founder. I was on the very classic Silicon Valley tech co-founder career path. And then writing that book totally changed my life and allowed me to travel the world and really meet founders from all over the world and see a whole bunch of different perspectives on what it means to build a business, or really even non-businesses. I worked for NGOs and governments and all kinds of stuff. People who wanted to make their organization more innovative, wanted to change the world through the thing that their organization does. So that was really an exciting and interesting 10 years of my life, getting to kind of feel like I got issued like a backstage pass to capitalism to see how it actually operates. And although that was very exciting, it was also kind of horrifying, because the more you learn about how the world works, the more astounded you are that it works at all. So are we getting that background noise? Can other people hear that? Or is it
I can hear a little. I'll fine. I'll mute it. I'll mute it.
Okay. Something's going on there. So yeah, that led to my, wanting to see what can we do about that, which ultimately led me to building the Long-Term Stock Exchange and doing a bunch of other stuff that all had the theme of how do we fix some of these deeper problems that everybody knows are plaguing people. And that's what's so interesting, is that I would meet with CEOs. I've been in the boardrooms of some of the world's most powerful companies. I've meeting with fancy politicians and thought leaders and lawyers and bankers and investors, and you name it. I got to see everything, and everybody's complaining about short-term thinking. Everyone's complaining about a lack of sustainability, or other stakeholders that are out for themselves. If you think people complain about Wall Street, you should see Wall Street complain about Silicon Valley. It's just unbelievable how much finger pointing there is and how much people feel like this, something's not right. So if you ask, and then I would have that same conversation with middle managers, and I walked the factory floors of actual manufacturers, and I would talk to the factory foreman and the guy actually assembling the assembling the appliances in the factory and to talk to them. So, I mean, it was really interesting. And I would encounter this problem everywhere, that everybody knows the way that things are set up is messed up. But then if you ask people, what should we do about it? People are like, I don't know. It's just the way things are. Like, we've been, indoctrinated into the idea that the world is the way that it is and it can't change. Even though if you just look at history, even for a few minutes, you see that it's actually changed quite a bit. And it's very specific the way that it has changed. So anyway, I mean, I'll just tell you one funny story. I was in DC. I used to go to DC all the time. I meet with my massive army of lawyers and lobbyists trying to figure out how to get the regulatory approval to do LTSE, even just to figure out, like, is it even legal when I'm proposing? And I happened to be there on the day where when Virgin America got bought by Alaska Airlines. Anyone remember that one? I was a devoted fan of Virgin. That would always be my way that I would fly from the Bay Area to DC. And I was sitting in DC, and I'm flying back home to San Francisco, and that happens to be that day. And I go to check in, and there's all kinds of baggage handlers and flight attendants, and the staff of Virgin America are like sitting around the check-in counter talking to each other about what just happened. And I'm like, oh, hi, I'm checking in for my flight. Why does it look like a funeral around here? And they're like, oh, well, Virgin America got bought. I was like, oh, what happened? And the person handling my bags is like, well, you know how it is. You can have all the greatest vision you want, but in our capitalist economy, like, if someone, if investors come in, they squeeze, and they just, like, gives me like a dissertation about short-term thinking and the flaws of the markets. And I'm like, wow, the baggage handler is clear on this point. But I just spent my whole day with all these highly paid lawyers and policymakers who are like, I don't know, is it really a problem? I don't know, maybe the problem will fix itself. Maybe it's related to interest rates. Like, people were just like, had their head in the sand, but the people that work for a living are super clear that something is wrong. So, and I just, during this whole same period where I'm trying to work on solutions, I also have had the privilege of working with a lot of startups, and some of whom are actually on this call. Very nice to see you, a few familiar names and faces. But I've gotten to work with startups, and at this long enough. The first wave of companies that were super excited about lean startup in 2008, 9, 10. I mean, many of those people are now like the CEOs of multi-billion-dollar public companies. So I've watched companies grow up. And I've gotten to see what happens when we start out with like a very idealistic and coherent vision of the world the way we want it to be. And then I've seen what happens. And I have many friends who have made quite a lot of money as entrepreneurs, investors, founders, the whole 9 yards. And a lot of them are miserable because we look at what these companies become by the time that they're quote unquote successful. And it's kind of horrifying. And who remembers Don't Be Evil? And it's like, what happened? What happened? And I'll just tell you one last story. I was on the call the other day with an ex-Googler, and I don't mean to pick on Google because, of course, they're not even uniquely bad among tech companies, let alone among companies in general. But I think all of us who are old enough remember the idealism we felt about Google, and therefore the disappointment is pretty common. Anyway, talking to a person who worked there for quite a number of years and was talking about the kind of the tension between the idealism of what they thought they were getting into and what the actual reality of working there was like. And I said, okay, just answer me 2 quick questions. Question number 1, tell me your probability assessment. Like, what are the odds that Google will file its next quarterly report on time? And he was like, come on, obviously 100%. I was like, how sure are you? Like, he's like 100% guaranteed. I was like, as certain as the sun will rise tomorrow? Yeah, absolutely. He's like, okay. Question number 2, what is the probability that Google, under the right set of circumstances, would kill somebody for money? He was like, oh, come on, that's not fair. They probably wouldn't do that. It's like, probably? 100%, as certain as the sun comes up tomorrow? He's like, well, no. I mean, come on, because what are their self-driving cars? Might kill someone and they'd have to cover it up. Like, they probably wouldn't. And I was like, oh, what if their social media property was involved in a genocide or something? Like, they probably would do the right. That was like, probably. And it was just so fascinating, the difference between one and the other. Now, let me ask you all who are here. Why is it that we know for sure that these companies will file their public report on time, but we're not sure if they will actually destroy human life for money? I think we all know the answer. It's not because human beings naturally have a love of quarterly reports in their heart. It's because we have built a massive apparatus to make sure companies do certain things. And so companies are good at the things that they care about. And in fact, we can infer what they care about by what they're good at. And so my question that I think is important for all of us as founders to be thinking about is like, Why have we built a system that guarantees that companies, will do these regulatory compliance steps for sure, but kind of treats whether they build great products, whether their customers are helped or harmed by the products, and whether the world is better off for their existence or not, as kind of a nice to have? Like, I guess if you have extra time after you're done filing your quota, I guess it's okay if you do that stuff too. To me, that strikes me as like we've just got our priorities totally backwards. So I'm kind of sick and tired of it, to be totally honest. Like, I just got tired of helping people build these companies that get surgically deboned and turned into these gelatinous blobs that are one, indistinguishable from the other. And they get rich doing it, but then they're miserable. I was just like, why are we doing this? I don't understand why. And so last thought, and then I'll take, Matt, we can do some questions or however you want to do it, but just by way of background, I just feel like we as a class, founders in particular, have a lot more power in this world than we realize. Because the system, the one thing I've learned about this system is that it fundamentally, despite the ideology of capitalism being all about value creation and competition and whatever, like the system, the way it's currently organized is very dysfunctional and destroys a lot of value. So it requires a steady stream of fresh meat to replace the companies that it destroys. And we're the dealer. We actually create the thing that keeps the whole system afloat. It needs a steady flow. And, as long as we're willing to build our companies, our children, and turn them over to this system and have them be destroyed, everyone's making a ton of money from that. Everyone's fine. But if we as a group say, wait a second, that's not what we want. We'd like to change the terms of what's required for us to do this incredibly important social function. We have the ability to make that change. So I think the first step, before we complain about investors and before we say VCs are the problem and Wall Street sucks and this and that, like, first order of business, we got to get our own house in order. Well, what are we actually trying to do? What do we want our companies to be? What does success really look like? That's what I've been working on the last few years.
Okay, so let's say people here are just heard what you just said, and they're like, I'm totally with this. I don't want to just go into the system that will destroy all this value. I want to do something different, and I want to build the company my way. What are some I guess what can a founder do about it? Is it just like this is how it is, and they go through the system and like this is how it is, or can they go left on the path where everyone else goes right? Can they take a different decision making process? What would you tell a founder that wants to make a difference in how they build their company? What steps can they take?
Yeah. So there's a lot you can do. That's what's so interesting to me is when you talk to, when you talk to your lawyers, you just talk to people in the industry. I mean, I've been around this long enough. People always tell you to kind of worry about that stuff later. Anyone ever been told it's too early to worry about that? It's my favorite thing. People's trick people pull. It's like, I want to create, a foundation to make sure that my non-employee stakeholders like profit from everyone's like, yeah, that sounds great. We'll totally get around to that, but it's too early. You're too young to worry about that. It's too early. You should worry about that later. And it's like, but I want to make sure our employees are always, it's like, we can always do that later. I want to make sure this, it's like, yeah, we can always do that later. Too early. Yeah. It's always too early. And then all of a sudden it's too late. So what happens is like, this is a real story. I was with a CEO who was taking the company public, and I was in the room. He had brought me in to try to help organize the IPO and make sure this stuff got in there. And we're sitting there, and we've got the CFO and the GC and all these people that he himself had hired to help him with the IPO. And he's like, okay, IPOs in 12 months or 18 months, however long it was. And it's like, I want to make sure we get to this extra stuff. And they're like, oh, you were serious about that? It's like, yeah, I've been talking about this for years. He's like, yeah, but you needed really to have done that before. I said, what are you talking about? So it's way too late now. What do you mean too late? Last time I talked to you about this, you told me it was too early. It's like, oh yeah, it was. But now it's too late. It's like, well, you're telling me from like July 6th through 9th, there was a couple days when it was the right time and you didn't mention it? No, it's never, ever the right time to do it differently. It's pathetic. It's always either too early or too late. So the first thing we have to do if we want to do something different as founders, we have to be willing to just say it out loud. Like, just as our building a great product is a non-negotiable requirement of the company being a success, so is building a great company. That's our goal. And then once we do that, then we can get into, well, obviously, I'm sure we'll talk about this today. Like, there's a lot of techniques you can do. But what's funny to me is I talk to startup people, everyone's like, there's only one way. You got to have a Delaware C Corp with a 5-person board, 2 insiders, 2 VCs, and an independent. You got to have 4-year vesting on your stock options. There should be a 90-day exercise window with, people have like, there's this like set of best practices. Like, this is the only way a company can be built. But what's bizarre is you go out into the wider world and there's all these exceptions to the rule. In fact, there are more exceptions than there are people who did it the standard way. And the exceptions are amazing. So one of the things I got to do when I traveled the world, I got to meet companies where there is a nonprofit foundation that owns the company. You know, people are all excited because OpenAI is structured that way, but that's like an old idea. There's been companies built that way like for a long time. And there's companies where like there's a family that's owned the company for a long time. There's even public companies, you know, think about Walmart with the Walton family, where that has like a family who acts as the stewards outside. I mean, there's all these unusual governance structures. There's member-owned and employee-owned cooperatives. There's obviously public benefit corps. There's social purpose corporations. I could go on and on about all these exceptions and weird structures. And what's so interesting is when I meet companies that are structured that way, I got into the habit of asking them, hey, you know, conventional economic theory says you should be at a major competitive disadvantage, you know, because public companies with investor accountability are disciplined and lean and they're ferocious. You can't compete again. You must be a soft-hearted nonprofit, you know, whatever. You know, do you find you're at a competitive disadvantage? And they would laugh in my face and they'd be like, are you kidding me? Like, it's quite like not a single one of those companies would ever trade places with a public company. Like, we get to make long-term investments. We actually eat their lunch all the time. And we can credibly say to the customers that we compete with them, hey, we actually care about your long-term welfare. In fact, for the foundation-controlled companies, we get to tell customers some of the prosperity that you help us generate gets reinvested back into the things you care about, into your community, into the people. And they're like, oh, that's a source of competitive advantage. So the first thing you got to realize is, although people tell you there's only one path, it's just like categorically not true. In fact, I was just reading a research study the other day that, I won't get into all the details, but anyway, it was comparing foundation-controlled companies to conventional public companies, and found that the foundation-controlled companies outperform on all these financial metrics. So if we're getting even into like social impact and the betterment of the world, just on the pure basis of like making more money, we make more money when we operate this way. How can that be? I was like, this seems like an open secret. Like, how is it that this is not like huge news, that the conventional economic logic that we're all told is the only way to go, like, totally sucks? What's going on here? And eventually I dawned on me that if people have to spend so much time and energy convincing you that the way the world is natural and it's always been that way and it can't change, why do they have to spend so much time and energy on it? You know, if it's the only way that it could be, should become self-evident. So the fact actually that there's this massive apparatus of people who are always making these arguments, you know, constantly trying to hammer us to tell us that it's only one way, like, that's actually a tell that they need to do that in order for us to believe that that is true. So, so I want to get into kind of some of the tactical stuff, of course, but I think it's important to understand, first of all, that change is possible. Like, there isn't only one way. And that the challenge in adopting these techniques, I have found, is that most founders don't actually have a super clear idea of what they're trying to accomplish from a mission and purpose point of view. So again, I always want to bring the conversation back to us as founders, what we can do. Like, we got to get our own house in order. So the first thing is to try to understand, like, what are we trying to accomplish? What does it mean to start a company? What does it, like, when people tell you got to have good governance in your company, what does that mean? And then we can get into some of that stuff too.
Cool. So I want to do one more question from me, and then we have a load of great questions. I just want a little more context from just one more answer from you before we get into these. You just said the word governance, and I think like a lot of founders, when they hear governance, they're like, oh, that's, you know, like you say, you tell this to me, like, it's the standard stuff. It's like the bare minimum. Can you kind of walk us through governance and like, why does governance matter in the realm of what you're talking about? And then we'll get into some of these questions that are being said in the chat.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, so here's how I think about governance. Governance is one of these funny words that everyone knows and no one knows what it means. And in fact, when I travel, like if I'm in San Francisco, New York, or DC, if you blindfolded me and I didn't know which city I was in, I could tell you what city I was in if I just asked someone nearby, like, hey, what does good governance mean? Based on what they told me, I could tell you exactly where I am. We speak a totally different dialect of English when we get into these topics. So people want to make this esoteric, but I think we can make it really straightforward. The fundamental problem that governance is supposed to solve is this: no individual person can ever make a promise on behalf of a company. Why? Because you can easily be replaced. When I talk to founders, I'm like, hey, why should anyone believe you? You know, these days, tech companies especially are working on more and more powerful exponential change, like just devastating technologies, right, that can change the world. And in fact, we have this crazy disconnect between like what's in the business plan. The business plan is like, we are a world-beating, world-defining monster of exponential growth. And then it's like, oh, do you have any ethical responsibilities since you're going to change the whole world? It's like, change the world. I just make a SaaS for databases. What are you talking about? So it's like, We want to have it both ways. But like, we're like actually changing the world. We're asking people to like invasively allow us to put devices in our body. We're trying to like, ask people to connect their private data to our AI to make their life better. Like, we're asking people to trust us. I always say, why should anyone trust you? Every founder I talk to is always like, but I'm such a good guy. You should, I have really good intentions. It's like, well, what does that matter? First of all, you could die tomorrow. Your investors could fire you tomorrow. They could replace you with somebody else. So how do I know that person will have good intentions? Or even worse, like we can get into all the bad things that can happen. Philip Morris might show up and offer to buy your company. And a lot of people in this world would say you have a fiduciary duty to sell it to them. Like, what gives then? Why should I trust? So the problem is you're not the company. The company is a super organism. It's as alive as you or me. That's my fundamental belief. Organizations are alive. They are not humans. They are their own thing, in which human beings are the cells and organs of their body. So we don't create them as founders, we birth them. And we don't grow them, we nurture them. Like, we're like a gardener or a parent. We take care of them. We try to allow them to accomplish what they were born to do. They have their own destiny. They live and they die. So if you want to make a promise on behalf of an organization, the promise doesn't matter what you intend. You're not the company. The promise has to be baked into the company's structure. That's what governance is. Governance are the promises that companies can make. And I started with, why can we be sure that Google will definitely 100% guaranteed file its next quarterly report on time? Because that is woven into the structure of the company, starting with the so-called fiduciary duties of the board down. So when we want to talk about what is good governance, the debate out there today is mostly about, should the company be controlled by its investors or controlled by the insiders, by the founders or management? And what I'm trying to do for founders is say, like, neither of those is a very satisfying outcome, right? Like, we've seen the problems with investor-controlled companies. Well, I don't have to get into that. We live that reality every day, but it's not like founder-controlled companies have a pristine record either. And it's not like in history, like a infinitely powerful, monarchic dynasty with unlimited power over an organization. Like, that's not exactly the greatest idea either. That has a lot of problems. And like, what happens when like the monarch wants to die, or they go crazy or whatever? There's all kinds of issues. So what I've been talking about lately is what I call mission-controlled companies. It is a company where the mission is at the center and everybody cedes power to the mission, so that we can make promises on behalf of the mission to the public and to other stakeholders. We win the public's trust by making promises that they can believe. So that is what governance is. So another way to think about it is, as companies grow, every company is like a little bubble of utopia. You build a company, you may not realize this, but you're creating a polis in the ancient Greek sense of the word. You create a little space where the world is the way you think it ought to be. And when companies grow, they turn more of the outside world into the inside. Like, that's what we do. We grow that little bubble until we have really quite dramatic impact on the world. So the other way to think about governance is like an exoskeleton, the place where the inside meets the outside. That's governance. So when we interact with investors, right? Whenever we sign a contract to do anything, when we take care of customers, when we take on legal obligations of any kind, that's governance. And so my view is that good governance should be whatever structure allows the company to really flourish over the long term. So it should be focused on trying to achieve its true purpose. And I'll just, we'll get into this, I'm sure, but like, the other thing that I think is really helpful when we talk about good governance, people say, okay, well then governance towards what end? You've already said we have the super organism and it has its own destiny, but what is it? How do I know its purpose or destiny? Is that something I decide? The other issue we have to really get into is, what does it mean to make a profit? Most of us are building for-profit companies, but we also are familiar with nonprofit companies. And I think we've got this this is like a category error. We've got this totally backwards. To me, being a for-profit is, you're an organization that is designed to maximize human flourishing. That's its purpose. So the Smithsonian is technically a not-for-profit in our current world, and Philip Morris is considered for-profit, which is insane. Like, Philip Morris has great ESG scores. It tells you everything you need to know about how messed up our world is right now. So I think we should get rid of that framework when we say, no, like, making a profit is about actually taking care of people and leaving the world better than we found it. So it's not about not making money. Like, there's nothing wrong with making money, but there's two ways to make money. You can make money in ways that are additive and value creating, or you can engage in rent seeking, extractive, exploitative strategies that, make money by destroying human potential. And so I think when we talk about this, we tend to go right to politics about, okay, you're saying we should ban this company, we should do this. And it's like, politics aside for a second. I'm not talking about regulation. I'm not talking about lawyers. I'm not talking about nothing but us as founders. What do we actually want our company to be? Do we actually want it to be rent seeking? Do we want it to become bureaucratic? Do we want it to be self-interested? Or do we want it to accomplish some mission? And like, I was literally just talking to a founder this morning whose mission of their company is the complete decarbonization of the economy in order to solve climate change. But the technology that they're building is super dangerous. I mean, it could be used for that, and that would be great. But you can imagine Exxon buying them out and being like, excellent, we're going to use this to do the reverse to make a lot more money. Or you should also think about, like, that's dangerous, that's scary. But the more scary thing, I think, is imagine a world in which this technology is successful. Investors come in and say, oh, this is awesome. You're making all this money. Instead of decarbonizing, let's just go play cities off each other. Let's go to every city and be like, hey, we're going to offer this awesome, amazing technology only to one of you, whoever pays the most. And then, of course, everyone's like, no, you can't. I got to have that technology too. You can't do that. So you bid it up way much. And then you go out and say, okay, we're thinking about not doing that. How about you pay us protection money? If everyone pays us protection money, then we'll agree not to sell it to only one person. And like, there are companies that exist today that like make a ton of money by not doing anything anymore, just by being paid protection money by lots and lots of their stakeholders. We've gotten so confused. People think building a free market means a market free of regulation. How many people have heard that before? If you go back and read Adam Smith, a free market was not a market free of regulation. It was a market free of rentiers. It's people who control these act as these gatekeepers that control access to key resources. They're the problem in the economy, and that's what we want to avoid becoming. So I think this is like a very straightforward like reconceptualization of what we're trying to do as a for-profit company that makes answering these impossible questions really easy. Because it's like, well, who are my fiduciary duties to? It's like, well, first and foremost, your fiduciary duty is to the mission. So every person with power over the organization, have they made that pledge or commitment? If not, we've got a problem. And then we can then ask ourselves, top down, from the boardroom all down to every individual employee, every decision the company is making, do we have a mechanism in place to make sure that that decision is being made through this lens, the lens that will lead to the most long-term value creation for the company? And I've just had enough, I've been at this long enough that I've worked with some companies that are organized this way, and they're total world beaters. I mean, they're so annoying to compete with. It's really, really frustrating for their competitors because there's no surface area on which to attack. Everything they do is dedicated to making their customers' lives better. And so it's very difficult. It's very difficult for anyone to get in. Now, I'll say one last thing before we get into questions, but people have a tendency to start conflating what I'm saying with impact investing. Like, oh, I just do some impact investing, or oh, yeah, everything should be charitable work and there should be no profits. And I'm trying to give the flavor that that's not quite right. I mean, not that there's anything wrong with that. And of course, impact is one of the dimensions that we want to evaluate decision-making on. But this is still very much a highly competitive, pro-free market, pro-making a profit framework. This is about making companies be more competitive in order to, sorry, I'm seeing so many questions flying by, it's starting to distract me. This is about making companies more competitive, like actually making them stronger in the face of all these gravitational forces that that distort what they're all about. So we get the incentive structure right. It's extremely powerful, just as a matter of having the company grow and flourish. And I just, like I said, I've seen ways in which the conventional structure doesn't let that happen. So I don't want us only to talk about climate change and inequality and like the big problems of our time, crony capitalism or whatever. I mean, those things matter. And of course, we got founders probably on this call right now. We're working on those problems. I don't mean to make light of it at all. But I meet a lot of people that are like, well, I'm not really trying to solve that. I just want to build a company where people can build great products. Honestly, that's what I'm all about. I want to build things with craft. I want to build things that like people look at and say, this is a beautiful and amazing artifact that was created by you. How can I get that? And even on that like very simple standard, that's the standard that I got into this in. Like I came to this not through trying to change the world, but just trying to get companies to be more innovative, to build better products. Like that was my original interest here. And I've now worked with enough companies that have accomplished that goal, that when you take a step back, you'll often find these governance structures in place, because the standard governance model where investors and the quarterly capitalism and the short-term pressure, like that is really antithetical to truly taking the time to deeply understand what customers need and to build high quality products to meet that need. So this is partly about kind of highfalutin concepts about saving the world, but it's also partly about just building the kinds of companies that we ourselves would want to work at and that we can be proud of having created. Let me pause there and take some questions.
Cool. Carla, your first question is a great one related to, some governance. So feel free to ask your first question you put in the chat.
Yeah, which was I wonder in this context what your thoughts are on movements like conscious capitalism, triple bottom line, B Corp certification. I'm a fan of conscious capitalism. I'm quite close to it. I actually used to produce a podcast on the subject with one of the founders of the movement. So that's the one that I know a bit better, but wondering what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, big fan. I mean, Kip and all those guys are friends of mine, and I'm in favor of it for sure. I think what these frameworks have tended to lack is kind of like they're kind of like frameworks from the outside in. They tend to be more policy frameworks about how we should encourage companies to do this thing, or how do we create incentives for companies to do the thing, or like more just like certifications of various kinds. Like B Corp is a great certification, public benefit corp, all these things like that. They're good, and I don't mean to say anything, not one bad thing to say about them, but for a lot of the practical questions that founders have to answer day to day about like how do I build a company like this, they tend not to be prescriptive enough, or at least not like meaty enough to answer the more detailed questions. That's been my experience with them. And again, I say that mostly as working with founders who are not from that movement. So that's the other thing that's really interesting, is that most founders that I meet, I'm the first person that ever talked to them about governance, ever. Keep in mind, these are often companies with an incorporated company already. Like I often sit with companies that are like, wait a second, or don't you have a charter filed in Delaware? And they're like, uh-huh. I'm like, well, do you know what it says? And they're like, sure, I got the standard thing from my lawyer. It's like, okay, do you know what the standard thing is? Like, what do you mean? Well, like hypothetically, if Philip Morris showed up right now and offered to pay you $1 more per share for your company, do you or do you not have a fiduciary duty to sell it to them? And they're like, oh, I definitely don't. Come on, I would never do that. It's like, have you read the document? Do you know what you yourself have filed? Right? Like, I mean, this is such a common thing that, like, it's actually, if you ever even watched the TV show Silicon Valley, it's like a punchline of a joke. There's a scene where an investor's like, you don't even know how your own effing company works. Most of us don't. I mean,
I think
just
that
be honest.
show is a documentary.
Yeah, but so that's one problem. And the second issue is, so most of these founders have never heard of any of these things. They've never heard of PPC. They vaguely know what a B Corp is. They don't know about conscious capitalism. They don't know about triple bottom. Like those things have not had the reach necessary to change what founders are doing. And then, as is the case with many human endeavors, I tried, because in building LTSC, one of the things we had to figure out was how do we create new listing standards for the public stock exchange. And one of the things I found really interesting is I went and I talked to everyone in ESG, everyone who's working on sustainability, B Corp, anything I could get my hands. I was like, if you're working on anything long-term related, new corporate forms, whatever, we should all get together. We should work together to come up with a common standard that everyone signs on to. That's like, this is the new standard. And almost every group I met with said, what are you talking about? We already have a standard like that. I was like, oh, what is it? It's my standard. I'm like, no, I know, but you understand that the guy down the hall just told me that he's got the standard and he doesn't like your standard. He's like, well, that guy's wrong. And you should choose my standard instead. I was like, but if I choose your standard, you understand that that guy won't sign on. He's like, well, that's same with him. I wouldn't sign on to his standard, right? So like, that's like, we've had this fractiousness in the movement that has prevented us from making progress here, which is natural. All those groups, they're all nonprofits. They're all in zero-sum competition for the same donors and the same limited slice of media attention that's available to corporate reformers. So I think I don't think that any of them is doing anything bad, but I think we have to kind of take a step back again as builders and just be like, okay, is this about slogans? Is it about certifications? Is it about like getting credit for doing something? Or is this actually about the kind of company we want to build? And we have to develop like a body of practice. It's not about convincing people that we're on the right path. It's about actually being on that right path ourselves, and then trusting as these companies grow and gain respectability and whatever, all these groups will be there to support them in doing the things that need to happen, from stage to stage to stage. That's kind of my view about it.
Nice. Thank you so much. One thing I wanted to add about that, just about the theory of it, there's, there's a book, the basic kind of, yellow cover book, and there's a sort of a field guide about it. And it's got some more practical stuff, but again, it's all very top level and it's all very dependent on just people's will to actually apply these things. The one thing that I do like about that is that there's very much this idea that we are either making money or we're doing good. And what I really like about the messaging around conscious capitalism is that you can do both. You should do both, because if you're not making money as a company, how can you be giving back to the community? How can you be providing jobs? So just to kind of put it out there for
I
everyone
think,
else,
I think
that
that,
money is
I
not
mean,
a
I
dirty
think the
word.
dichotomy there is just wrong. I mean, I mean, just, and no disrespect to anybody who's been operating this way, because I think this is like a relatively new idea, but I think like we solve so many theoretical problems when we just say that like that human flourishing is part of the definition of profit. We don't give up the maximization element that has made capitalism strong in the past. I mean, obviously we want to be optimized. We want to have as much impact as we can. We want to do as much good as we can. So being inefficient is bad. And like all of us know nonprofits that like are all talk, no action, just basically just fundraising machines that don't do anything. I don't want to hold that up as some kind of avatar of anything good. Like that's a big mess too. So what we want to build is organizations that just like really have fidelity to their own mission, and where the mission is to promote flourishing. Like once we adopt that intellectual framework, what I found is that just like all these tricky problems just go away, and it actually becomes very straightforward. And the nice thing is like I'm a big believer in drilling down to the details, right? Like that's kind of how Lean Startup started with like, yes, there were some high level principles, but really the details of like why it was successful is because we got into the mechanics of like, okay, you have a product, you want to deliver it on a certain day. Like what do we actually do? I got 3 customers with 5 different opinions about what my product should be. What do I do? Like it was designed to answer those more specific questions. And I feel like we as a group now, we have a chance to build a comparable level of technique around like, okay, how long should my stock option vesting plan be? Okay, who should have a vote on my board? Okay, what is the appropriate structure? What should be in my shareholder rights agreement when I bring an investor on into my company? What is the appropriate governance role for investors? What is it like? What is the right way to give back to my community? And then in particular, how do I take care of my non-employee stakeholders? So, think about like Uber drivers or Airbnb hosts. Like, legally speaking, they're not my employees. I can't give them stock in the company, but they are the ones who powered the company to its success. What are my obligations to them? And then the reason this is kind of coming up now, I feel like is bubbling up a lot more, is that in the age of AI, these issues have become so much more prevalent in the public's imagination. Because if you look at the doomsday scenarios that people talk about with AI, people are not afraid of AI. They're afraid of corporations. Like that's where the rubber meets the road. And so it's like, okay, if AI is too powerful of a technology to be held by a traditional exploitation-oriented public company, then how should it be held? I don't think it's any kind of coincidence that OpenAI and Anthropic, the 2 leading generative AI companies, both have unusual governance structures. But I think the fact that we're having that reevaluation about AI is spilling over to lots of other kind of companies. Because like, wait a minute, what if we'd done that for social media? Would we be living in the hellscape we're living in right now? Like maybe not. So I think it's kind of prompting a global reevaluation of what is the purpose of organization.
This is a great timing for this question. Erica, if you want to ask the second part of your question around ownership rights for your people, I think that's super relevant.
Okay, thanks, Matt. I'm not going to come on camera because I'm still in my jammies. We're trying to create ownership rights for employees, but not when you're talking about alternative funding and alternative structures, right? We're not, we're a niche platform, so we're not going to go after venture at any point. So, we've done an LLC with ownership rights, and we've really waffled back and forth on different classes. Because if you have different classes of ownership rights in an LLC, you can't file as an S corp for tax purposes. You can only file as a partnership, and then that creates double taxation unless everybody's an entity, which if they were employees, they want some. So have you seen a lot of other companies kind of go this way or look at, you were mentioning it, but even if you could throw out, I mean, I've looked a lot at Spark Toro's stuff and they've open sourced all their docs, but any other good examples of companies that are, not following that C Corp, Delaware C Corp path that, are doing a great job and you think that they might be onto something?
Well, I mean, I happen to be a fan of the C Corp path. I just think you have to structure the share classes properly. And part of the reason is because C Corps are so flexible with issues like this.
Yeah.
The other solution, like basically one solution to so if you think about like what we've been talking about, okay, so we want to have a company whose purpose is is incorporated into its structure. We want to be able to make promises that people can believe. So if you just walk through all like what are the like valid solutions to that problem? One solution is to have a single entity where the multi-stakeholder issues are resolved through the governance of that one entity. But the other solution is also perfectly valid, is to solve this with an ecosystem of related entities. So my would guess in an LLC situation, you might be able to solve what you want to solve rather than having different share classes of the LLC, but just have the LLC be one component of a larger strategy. That's what I was hinting at before with foundation controlled companies. There's all these different structures out there where, there's sometimes you see what's called a mission lock vehicle. Sometimes someone's just saying, so you might have a union, you might have a corporate foundation, you might have a research foundation, you might have a care delivery vehicle. Healthcare companies often have to have a separate entity that's like owned and operated by doctors in order to legally practice medicine in different states. So you often wind up with this kind of constellation of different entities. And now we have a different governance problem, which is how do we keep all the entities aligned? How do we make sure that everyone's incentives, line up correctly towards the mission now that we all work for different companies? And how do we prevent civil war? And a really good solution to that problem, it's like a general term that I've been working on. I call it the spiritual holding company, like akin to a real holding company, like what you see like Warren Buffett has, right? Like his companies, they're all wholly owned subsidiaries of a central company that does resource allocation. But you don't really have to have a complete subsidiary relationship with the different entities in order to do this alignment. With the spiritual holding company, the way it works is we have some central entity, could be an LLC, could be a foundation, could be a trust, could be a PPC, but something where like the trustees, the directors of that entity really have the mission at heart. And then they have the ability to appoint board members or to have a role in the governance of all the different entities that are involved in the creation of the effect we want for customers. This is very related to the value chain concept. This is something that was pioneered by Toyota production system people, like where you have the co-ownership of the central thing between the Toyota family and the vendors and the suppliers. So I don't mean to say that there's only one correct answer. I think what we're trying to develop, as a movement here, is to get terminology for all of the different valid solutions in order to get into that. Does that make any kind of sense?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
I think some people have a follow-up on it too.
Yeah, please, let's do it.
Cool. So there are a bunch of questions. If we don't get to all of them, just ping me after, and we can get Eric to answer it over email if we don't get to yours. This is kind of an interesting one. I actually haven't heard Eric talk about this before. So I'm curious. Islam, sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. Feel free to ask your question and related about the lean startup in relation to the mission control company.
Sure. Thank you so much. Hi, Eric. I'm a big fan. I'm a consultant, and I've been actually playing with the lean startup methodology for a while for helping companies being purpose-driven, like with
cool.
lean startup. And I would love to hear from you. Like for me, it's all about vision, strategy, and product, the foundation. I would love to learn from you, like your thoughts about the technicality of doing this.
I don't think I follow. Try me again.
So how to use the lean startup methodology to help companies from the scratch being mission controlled companies? Is there a specific way you've been experimenting with, or thoughts about this? Thank you so much.
Yeah. I mean, so this to me, all this work that I've been doing is just an extension of trying to solve the same problem that I started trying to solve with Lean Startup, which is, Lean Startup is about how do you build a management system that can produce the outcomes that we've been talking about. The problem is that what I've learned through my years, and obviously I wrote a sequel to that called The Startup Way, which is about what happens to those same management principles as the organization gets larger. The issue is that as good as your management system is, it can be overwhelmed by these gravitational forces. That's kind of the way it works. So like when we enter into a financial system, the values of that system are transmitted to us through the transactions we engage in with that system. And just like gravity, when we're small, we are buffeted by the effects of larger entities. We're the small one until gravity is a two-way thing, right? Like every entity that is in a gravitational relationship with another, like they both impact on each other. So you impact on the earth just like it impacts on you, but like because of the relative size of you versus the earth, like the earth doesn't mind too much when you jump up and down, whereas you mind a lot more when you fall off a building. So the same thing is true for startups, only startups grow a lot faster than humans. So eventually you start to become large enough that you exert gravitational pull on the things around you. And that's why I think a lot of people are really confused. They use something like Lean Startup to grow quickly, and they're so used to being the underdog that they haven't actually really thought about what are the values that I want to be transmitting out into the world through the transactions that I engage in. So I kind of wrote in this diagram. It's actually in the Lean Startup. The original origin of the startup way idea is that there's like a pyramid, right? People, culture, process, accountability in that order. And most people, when they want to change an organization, they go tops down. They're like, oh, get me the right people. And then then those people will create the right culture. And then whatever process accountability, we can leave it later. The major thing that I have learned implementing Lean Startup now over all these years is that management works in reverse. First, we start with how are people held accountable? What are the incentives that drive their behavior? That determines what is the range of processes that they might be able to organize around. And process drives culture. Like that's basically what I've discovered. You can start with whatever your awesome culture is, but if you copy paste the same governance, the same management system as somebody else, you will wind up with the same culture that they have eventually. So what happens is, as companies grow, it's really fascinating to watch. I was just doing this exercise with a company. How big were they? Gosh, I think they had 2,000 employees now or more. And I just asked how many people, joined in the last year, and it was like more than half the people. So the vast majority of people that work at a successful company were not there when it was a scrappy underdog. And that's true for its whole life. Like of the first 500 people, like the most recent 250, right? We're not there when it was scrappy. Like when it was like, it's because that's just the nature of exponential growth. It's always going to be true. So what happens is startups wind up importing a lot of cultural DNA from other organizations into their company, and then they're shocked at what happens. In fact, I've worked with a bunch of companies where like the key execs came from other well-known companies. So there's like an Apple person, a Google person, a Goldman Sachs person, a McKinsey person. And if you actually go walk around that company, you'll often find that there's like a mini McKinsey that's like grown up like a tumor inside the company. There's like a mini Goldman Sachs. And now the people working at the McKinsey hate the people that work at the Goldman Sachs because they're cultural incompatible. And like the Apple people are off like in private, secretly like doing their thing. And it's just like you wind up with like 5 different company cultures, and then you're an incoherent mess. So that's kind of the main thing I've learned, is that if you want to avoid this from happening, you have to really think about alignment of incentives, alignment of goals at all levels, at every someone's got an ex-Amazon story. Yeah, ex-Amazon people are very dangerous, like a highly enriched uranium. Not because it's bad, but because like that culture works in that structure. You put that same person, that same culture in a different structure, it doesn't make any sense at all. And like people don't realize how contextual their skills are. So in fact, one of my favorite interview questions I love to ask people is, tell me about a best practice, that's really helped you in your career. And I'll have them tell me the story. How did you learn it? When did you apply it? How great? And tell me all the reasons it's so great. Like, great. Tell me a situation where that best practice would be a bad idea to use. And most people can't do it. It's not just that they won't do it. It's they're like, it's a best practice. That means best, always best. And right, like think about it. If I was like, most people are like, tell me the situation in which gravity is appropriate. It'd be like, it's a universal law. What are you talking about? But universal laws are very different. The effect of gravity on planet Earth is very different than if you're in, an orbit around a white dwarf or something, right? So like the actual experience of a thing is very context sensitive. Most people don't appreciate it. So if we want to build organizations that actually thrive over any period of time, we have to be as focused on the greatness of the organization as we are on the greatness of the products that it makes.
All right, there's one category we haven't touched on all yet that Ricky's question will open up. I know we only have about 5 or 6 more minutes, so this might be the last one. But Ricky, feel free to ask your question that I'm sure a lot of people are thinking.
Yeah, definitely. Hey, Eric, good to see you again. Yeah, kind of the underlying question, I elaborate a little bit in the chat here, but the whole concept of we are just humans, founders trying to create a business, and it's hard enough the day to day. And if someone came to you right now and said, here's $1 million check, this will help grow the business, but we need a board seat, we need this and that, or even larger, the Philip Morris example, to buy the company on a premium. I mean, I would take an anonymous poll that I wrote 9 out of 10 people in this very chat would take that deal. And so how do you get down to the core concept of like money drives business, business drives how the world's structured, and how do we even begin to counter that? Just kind of curious in your thoughts.
Well, I'd take the other side of that bet, honestly. I'd be actually really surprised if it was 9 out of 10. I'd actually be really disappointed, but I don't know if it's as true as you think. So let me answer the question a couple different ways. First of all, let me accept the premise of the question, just talk about what do we do in that world. Well, like this might only be for the 1 out of 10 who doesn't think that way. It's okay. I don't feel like everyone has to do the same thing. I believe that this framework allows us to outcompete the people who have a different framework. And so I'm not really worried about it. I mean, people used to ask me about lean startup. Especially when I talk to big companies, I'd be like, why should I adopt this? I'd be like, frankly, I don't care. This is a more effective way to work. So I know for sure that in the future, the customers you currently serve in your industry will be served by someone who works this way. Whether that's you because you did the transformation or some startup that disrupts the crap out of you, that's not really my business. You live here, I'm just visiting. I think it'd be nice if you spared your 300,000 employees the disruption of having to go out of business and find a job. But like, that's your concern, not my concern. This works. So first thing is like, why? Like, this is really the question people have to confront. Do we believe that this is a better way to make money? Forget social impact, forget the effect on the world. Just like, do you actually believe this is a better way? And like, I'll just give you one example. One of my favorite companies, it's in the healthcare space, and they have a very clear ethos of love. They're like, can you imagine what most people can't even understand what I'm talking about? They're like, what do you mean? What would it be like if my health insurance company loved me? What would that be like? Most people are like, I don't know. My health insurance company would definitely kill me for $1. In fact, most health insurance companies employ lots and lots of whose job is just to find novel ways to deny claims. Can you imagine how well those people sleep at night? Like, I went into medicine and this is what I do. Ugh. Anyway, so they tell their employees, you should treat every customer like they're your own parents. So if there's any question about what to do, just if you love this person, what would you do? Do that. And it's really interesting. But people hear that, they're like, love, oh, it sounds like, lovey-dovey, like doesn't sound very ruthless. But like, this company has grown to like billions of dollars in revenue in a crazy short amount of time. They're extremely successful. And part of the reason is that doing things that are harder is actually easier. This is the thing nobody ever believes. Harder is easier. Why? And the founder who built this company has done this because he's a very successful multi-time founder. He's done this before. And he's watched as previous, I don't want to name the company. I mean, people can probably figure it out, but I'm trying to avoid naming companies because we're recording here. People can ask me privately. I'm happy to tell you more about it, the specific details. But like, by saying that the company is going to solve the American healthcare system full stack, everyone's like, that's crazy. That's so much more difficult than just solving your little piece. But like, is it? They found it much easier to attract talent to that mission because there's all these people who've been like trying to solve that problem their whole lives. And like, finally, I have an opportunity to do it. And I'm not just talking about fancy executives. Think what it's like to be a doctor where someone's like, listen, you're actually going to get to work for somebody who will give you the time and space to take care of your patients. That's our mission. They get way better people. It's a huge advantage in fundraising because they bring on like really unbelievable investors who believe in that vision, who are way more excited about this than if they were in a standard company. But also they have crazy high customer retention. Can you imagine what their customer loyalty looks like? I can tell you story after story after story of customers who've called the customer service line. The customers call the customer service agents guardian angels. Because if you call in, you have a problem, they will fix your problem. It doesn't really matter if the problem is related to the company's products or not. I can tell you like story after story after story about people who they've literally saved that customer's life by helping them, get into better housing or getting them like, there was a customer that had toxic mold in their apartment. And they were like, we're treating you for the symptoms of the toxic mold over and over and over and over again. How about we actually fix the problem of getting you out of that, situation? Like, now that is both right from a moral purpose. Like, obviously that's the right thing to do. You save this person life, but also just think about it from a business perspective. In the insurance industry, the big problem in health insurance is we treat the symptom, we don't cure the disease. So we waste a ton of money rather than actually solving the problem. So now imagine some private equity owned health insurance company calls up that person like, hey, I want you to switch to my health insurance company. I'll save you $3 or whatever. Person's like, I'm going to switch away from my guardian angel who loves me to help you get richer for your private equity overlords. Like, no thanks. So I know we've kind of gone over time here, so I want to be respectful of everybody's time, but I want people to realize that this is not just about being a do-gooder, although you do sleep a lot better if you are a do-gooder. It is about having companies that are actually able to accomplish their mission in a more robust way. So even if you just are like a hardcore capitalist and want to, destroy your competitors and, eat their bodies for lunch or whatever, like, you can be as ruthless as you want to be. I still think this is the better way to go, just because it's more effective.
All right. Well, thank you, Eric, for spending an hour with all of us talking about all things long-term thinking, mission control companies and everything around that. I just put in the chat before people leave. This is not a one-off event. This is part of like a larger movement called the Long-Term Society. This is something that I'm a part of. There's 3 ways you can plug into it. One, if you want to learn more about the capital raising side of long-term company building, we're doing an event in 3 weeks where Eric will be back and we'll be talking about all things raising capital with a long-term view in mind. If you want to keep updated on the content that Eric's putting out around this content, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel. And we have like a informal council board thing of people that really align with the long-term society and like these views that Eric is talking about. So if you want to kind of get involved, shoot me an email and we can plug you in. But everyone just thank you so much, Eric, for coming. This is so valuable. Thank you everyone for coming, spending an hour with us, and we hope to see you at the next one.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Matt, for putting this on. Really appreciate it. We love your feedback, everybody. Let us know what you think.
Yes, please provide your feedback. I'll share it all with Eric. Thank you, everybody.
So good. Till next